Welcome to the Savage Worlds GM podcast. I'm your host, Jared Savage Daddy Gunning. Tonight's episode, like all episodes, brought to you by Roll20.net, the world's largest virtual tabletop. Check them out today at Roll20.net. Follow us on social media. We're on Facebook and Twitter, SWGM Podcast. Subscribe, like, and share on the YouTube channel, Savage Worlds GM Podcast. /. Check us out, support us on Patreon, become a Patreon patron today, or www.patreon.com /SWGM podcast. Tonight, welcome to a special Thanksgiving episode. Tonight, we're going to be talking about playing evil characters in an evil campaign. And here to discuss it, Dave, the rules Maven Scott.
No, my cell phone was not on during the podcast.
It's good pod. And Dustin, the no lower third, Savage and Turnsmith.
Paddle faster, I hear banjos.
So tonight we want to just kind of explore. It's always there's always this fascination. You hear it at any point from a GM or a player. Ooh, what if we were all Sith in a Star Wars campaign? Ooh, what if we were all bounty hunters? Ooh, what if we were all the supervillains in a superheroes universe? Oh, what if we were the Suicide Squad? Let's play something evil. And it's basically just it's basically feed the murder hobo desire to just slaughter and kill and be evil. So tonight we want to kind of discuss some GM tips to make that happen if that's something you want to do. Point out some of the pitfalls that are inherent in running an evil campaign. But first, let's go ahead and start off with just a general exploration or definition of what an evil campaign is. I think an evil campaign is any campaign in general. Very generalized description is where you're playing the quote-unquote villains or the bad guys. If you're playing a mobster mafia game, you're playing an evil campaign. You're not playing the goody two-shoes heroic character.
Well, so long as you're playing the mob.
Yeah, as long as you're in the mob. Yeah, you're either a hitman, you're extortion, you're a racketeer, you're a mafia guy.
I think, and this is where some of the disagreement tonight's going to come from, is the definition differences between us as well. Because for me, an evil campaign is decided as soon as all of the player characters have their own personal, selfish, greedy, evil personal motivation that drives them to want to do something. And it's rooted in that evil aspect. It's gotta be selfish and nasty and uncaring towards the well-being of others. And once you reach that tipping point where more than half the group has that kind of a motivation to their character, you've gone into the evil campaign, whether you wanted to or not. Once you get at least half your group to go that route, it's going to have that tone to your game.
I'd agree.
I think for a lot of people, the issue comes down to we think in terms of heroes and villains instead of antagonists and protagonists. So if you're playing a villain campaign, your characters are still going to be the protagonist, but because you're following their story, it's easier to justify the actions. If you watch story structure, the reason a character is the villain is because you don't see what motivated them to do it. And sometimes, of course, like they do things that are evil, but because you've been following them, you've been accepting them along the way. Like Breaking Bad is a great example. Spoiler warning, Walter White becomes a drug dealer.
Oh, and a killer. He murders people. Oh, just flat out murders people.
Yeah.
Another classic, if we're going to use TV examples, is, take a look at The Sons of Anarchy. That starts out, moment one, you're following the bad guys.
Yeah.
But what makes that such an interesting show is you see the underlying life motivations and the situation they're in, where you as a viewer are in favor of the bad guy. You're rooting for the bad guy to get away with doing the bad thing, even though in logically, we all know selling drugs, selling dope, killing people, blowing shit up is illegal and bad, and therefore bad.
Right. And when we're talking about evil too, we're really talking about morally ambiguous characters, right? We're talking about the Nietzschean, I'm beyond good and evil. I'm the pragmatic character.
Mhm.
I've got a set of goals that I'm going to achieve. This is the most efficient way to do it. And morality doesn't play into it.
But don't pigeonhole this to being just that one view of an evil campaign. I mean, if you want to play the mustache twirling, high pulp era evil characters, by all means, sit down and do that. I don't think it's as easily sustainable for a long running campaign. I think you can do a short campaign very easily, but I think long run, that's going to be a lot more work for everybody at the table to keep that running. But you can absolutely do anywhere on the spectrum of the high pulp mustache twirl trope evil to the grounded, intensely, motivation driven protagonist who happens to be morally ambiguous, doing what they have to survive. The Rick Grimes who's biting people's throats out versus the Snidely Whiplash are both viable things in this world.
Right. Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Well, Dave, playing off of what you said with Rick Grimes, I mean, think about it. Season 2, Shane is starting to break down, and he's going to shoot Rick, but then Rick is forced to kill him, and you're like, oh, man, Shane. Like, by season 4 or 5, you're like, you know what? Shane was ahead of the curve. Like, he had the inside track.
He was a visionary.
They did that Snickers meme of, here, Rick, have a Snickers. When you're hungry, you act a bit like Shane.
Yeah, well, since we're on The Walking Dead, let's talk about Negan as an example. And it's a common trope in The Walking Dead where it's, well, define evil. What is it? What is a bad? If you do bad things for the right reason to protect the people you love, are you really evil? I like Negan, the Negan character, especially the most recent episode. No spoilers really in there. It's kind of been brought up before. He's not a psychotic killer. You see that when he gets the group together at the beginning. It's, listen, I need to kill the right people at the right time so I don't have to kill everybody because people are a resource.
Yeah. I think the easiest way to describe that is he's not the Governor 2.0. He's a far deeper, more nuanced character that has some motivations to what he's doing. That's not just me, mine. I'm off the freaking deep end mentally because of the fact that my daughter's a zombie.
Right.
The governor himself, before Michonne put his daughter down, I mean, if we're talking like the TV series, the whole purpose of clearing out and removing survivors from the prison was so that they couldn't form a beachhead, so that they couldn't invade Woodbury, because he knew eventually whoever stayed there would come into Woodbury.
Oh, and there again, you've got the difference between the portrayal of the character and the actual motivations of the character, where they're doing an evil thing because they're the antagonist of the show. Mm-hmm. It's evil to attack the protagonists.
Right.
But it's the right thing in the case of Woodbury, who's trying to make sure that someone isn't going to come and take away what they have and they fought for. But then I think that flies out the window when we see the whole episode with the downed helicopter. Mm-hmm. Where there's not a threat from these soldiers and they're just slaughtered.
Right.
I think that's what starts that slide with the governor into truly he's a Snidely Whiplash, mustache twirling trope evil character.
Yeah.
Versus Negan being a more nuanced.
He's proactively. Yeah, he's proactively evil.
I'm just gonna throw this out here about Negan. I don't know where he went to design school or who his stylist is, but if he is going to choose to advocate for shitting pants, maybe he needs to rethink his process, because you don't wear those, man. You throw them away.
Well,
unfortunately, I haven't seen past like episode 3 of the season that Negan's introduced, so I can't comment on that particular aspect. But
I mean, this is like, it's single-handedly the issue with Negan that makes him such a good villain is he's so damn charismatic. You're sitting there thinking, this guy killed Glenn and Abraham, but he's really funny. And that's one of the issues, is a villain that is charismatic, that's kind of funny, gets under your skin, and you're like, I like this guy, even though I shouldn't.
Right. Well, the other thing, too, is he doesn't believe in killing somebody unless it gives him leverage for what he wants to try to achieve either. I'm gonna go so far out on the limb as to say as well, as ham-handed and poorly written as it is, another good example of this is the Mustafar battle, Mustafar between Obi-Wan Kenobi and Anakin, where he's telling him that, you know, Palpatine is evil, and he's going, well, from where I stand, my point of view, the Jedi are evil. There's depending on how you look at it, there's a valid points on both sides of that argument.
Well, I mean, like the way the line was delivered just sounded awful, but if you think about it, the Jedi are this weird space cult that always surrounds like nobility and wields these flaming swords to hack up just low-level soldiers and clerks and all that jazz. And then they go into like these backwater planets and kidnap children to brainwash into their cult because they're special.
Well, if you look at it too, the Jedi are constantly violating their own tenets of their religion and edict and ignoring it.
These peacekeepers use force powers to make people agree to the binding arbitration that they decide you're going to agree to. So much so, and they've touched on this in some of the novels that are no longer canon, unfortunately, where there are planets that actually despise the Jedi and won't allow Jedi on the planet any longer because they got the short end of the stick a century ago from some Jedi who decided something. Right. But that said, I think the interesting aspect of the conversation we're having so far is none of us are throwing out literary references. None of us are throwing out game material references. We're specifically pointing to pop culture. And I think that short-sightedness of the modern gamer also takes away from the ability to have a real discussion about what makes a character evil. And I mean, just to go like, for lack of a better term, biblical for a moment, let's talk, Cain and Abel. The origin story of violent evil within the race, supposedly, and it's a selfishly motivated act against someone you're culturally supposed to care about, that is morally reprehensible, that makes that an evil act. And I think that if your player characters aren't committing those acts to people that matter, you're not playing an evil campaign.
Right.
If there's not betrayal among the player characters, if there's not rich, well role-played NPCs that matter, then there's not the foundation necessary to then have an evil game. There has to be someone to do something morally reprehensible to before the act becomes morally reprehensible, rather than just being carte blanche RPG murder hoboism that here's a challenge the GM set in front of you and you gunned it down.
Okay, so branching out on a literary topic then, Shakespeare's Macbeth. Who's the evil character? I'd argue all of them are the evil character.
I mean, therein lies your classics. When you start looking, every character has a greedy, selfish motivation, and
Except
that breeds that evil, morally reprehensible behavior that drives that story forward. Without that, it just doesn't exist. And it's just a bunch of characters doing things that don't matter to the audience because they're not invested in who it was done to.
Right.
So, if I may tell a story of a campaign that I ran.
Oh, we're hitting the bingo card.
Yep.
Yeah, mark the bingo card. Tell a story.
All right, tell a story. No lower thirds. I'm going to get y'all drunk. That's the dealio. So
3 shots on Thanksgiving. Hey, well in the bag.
Somebody's going to have a little bit of turkey. So I was doing Deadlands Noir, and in the campaign, I had the villain was actually the servitor of vice. I'd gone off script, off of your standard 4, and gone into like some of the deadly sins. And what I would do is the players could, for a little bit of a boon here or a little bit of a boon there, commit some evil act. And the strange thing about it, we were doing it on Roll20, roll20.net for all your needs. Because of that, we were able to do like whisper messages. So they would message me, and I would agree with them to work on that. And I'd say, well, if you do this, then I'll give you an extra Benny. Or if you'll do this, then maybe you get a nicer item. All the players who took that up, when the players left, their player characters had dug themselves so deep that they were effectively villains in the campaign. So I had more of my villains for later seasons were the result of player choice.
Interesting. I think too, well, I kind of want to talk about this as well as part of this conversation. I think the genesis of running an evil campaign is a GM reaction to murder hoboism. I was like, well, listen, if you're supposed to be the good guys and you're slaughtering innocent villagers, fuck it. Let's just go evil and see how that plays out. I mean, how much of that do you guys feel is like, are we talking, we're not talking, when we say evil campaign, we're not necessarily talking about a group of psychopaths.
Right.
On a murder spree. Although that could be an evil game where you're being hunted down by the cops and everything else as a group.
You will find in a lot of cases, you'll get these campaigns where people start out as heroes, but they keep making these choices. And it's really the GM, in all honesty, that decides based off of the consequences they throw out there. You know, if you are just sort of like, okay, well, you know, I'm going to let you get away with murder, then they're going to continue to murder. You know what I'm saying? So
I've run Pirates of the Spanish Main. We've talked about it on the show before. Both of you have actually played in the game. Pirates of the Spanish Main and any pirate game suffers from the idea of being a bloodthirsty scallywag in a game where you're supposed to be playing these swashbuckling privateer heroes. The game is ostensibly written to put the player characters in the hero role in a high piratical adventure with a little leniency to allow them to engage in light piracy. Every single game I've run of that, someone goes on a murder spree. In the game I ran that both of you were part of, we had the captain among the players decide to scuttle and destroy the very first ship you guys came upon, sending all souls to the drink, which is a cataclysmically evil act. In the previous incarnation of this campaign, I had a player stand in broad daylight on a city street and cut down 6 guards to get one thief that was nearby, and wondered why the rest of the city guard was mobilized to come after this group of people that killed 6 city guards in broad daylight. You ostensibly run into this desire to treat the game like D&D or like the other things we play, where everything the GM puts in front of you is designed to be mowed down from your players, which pushes them more evil unless you find some way to rein that back in. And I think that's what you're talking about here with this idea of the consequences you throw at them. If I had just said, oh, well, the captain of the guard is happy you caught the thief, and not you done anything about the 6 dead slain guards, they're just going to keep doing that in every town to be the heroes of the story.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Which, it was funny because, and I remember that game, Dave, one of the things that made us the good guys was the fact that the system around us was corrupt. If the system hadn't been corrupt, there's no way we could have justified being the good guys.
Right. So at this point, we're talking about a group of anti-heroes, right? A classic anti-heroes trope.
And I think there's obviously many forms of that. There's the Suicide Squad form where the villains are put in a position where they have to do something heroic despite not wanting to. And then there's the other end of the spectrum, which is more what we're talking about here, where the player characters are doing evil acts, but they're doing it in the name of good because of the corrupt system. You could point to a lot of, again, popular culture things like The Punisher and whatnot would be great examples of that type of an anti-hero.
Right. I could even argue Star Wars example is an example is the rebels are anti-heroes. They're flaunting law and order. They're flaunting the rule of law because it's unjust. And therefore it's okay. It's okay to shoot, military soldiers by the hundreds and blow up military installations of the reigning government, galactic government, because, well, they're evil assholes.
I think that's the big issue. Is like, do you value the lives of cannon fodder? Because someone that is heroic will look at a character that is background dressing that wouldn't matter, see them in danger, and try to save them. Or a heroic character would be like, no, wait for the guards to pass. Whereas an anti-hero or a villainous character, they just don't care. Like, the characters that they're coming across don't matter, just the goal matters.
Right. Or you've got the Batman phenomenon, right? The vigilante who never uses a gun, doesn't use lethal weaponry.
We'll come back to that. I want to continue the Star Wars conversation for just a moment and say, I think that's one of the reasons that Rogue One was as embraced by the long-term fans the way it was, because the opening scene has a rebel shoot another rebel in the back because the secondary rebel is injured and is going to get them both caught and is going to spill the beans about the plan. And as soon as he knows he's going to spill the beans about the plan, and there's no longer a way to keep him from getting caught, it is justifiable in this heroic rebel of the Alliance to gun his friend down in cold blood and scamper up a wall to get away from the evil empire. I think that by definition is where you get that anti-hero idea. It's a very unheroic act to betray and murder an ally, but it serves the greater good. And I think that's where that anti-hero trope plays the best, is when there's the greater good to handwave all the evil away with. Now, as to the Batman thing, I think the most interesting thing that people have pointed out with the Batman is, he's a superhero who won't kill. He's a vigilante. But you look at the force he uses, where he pins a man's head to the ground with the tire of a car, or he punches people so hard it shatters their clavicle and leaves them in the intensive care unit for 6 months. This is not a good guy. We all praise him as the hero, but there's a reason that the whole rest of the DC universe treats him as the Dark Knight, that guy off in Gotham that nobody can stop.
Well, beyond that, I mean, if you look at it, his motivation, he claims that he's a hero and a good person, and he wants to protect the innocent. No, he wants to beat up the guilty. He wants to...
He's on a vengeance trip.
Yeah. And he's spending billions of dollars. I could cut him some slack if he was like running around in, I don't know, like the 1960s gear with like just using a regular car and a grappling hook. But like modern Batman is spending the GDP of a small country on stupid crap.
Honest.
I mean, it is like seriously, Bruce Wayne, if we took it down to brass tacks, could just pay people to not commit crimes and would be much more effective.
Yes, but he doesn't want that.
Like
his motivation is to fight crime.
Right.
I would love it if they did a Batman Elseworld where instead of buying all the gadgets, he just hired all the henchmen. I'm like Joker and Riddler and Two-Face and Scarecrow, they got to do that stuff hands-on, and they get their ass handed to them by Gordon. That would be great. Wayne Enterprises, making the world safe by preventing crime.
Well, okay, so if you take a look then, since we're in the superhero area, Batman versus Superman. Superman's your iconically goody two-shoe White Knight.
So we're not talking about the movie, sure.
Right.
I mean, the recent movie was just god-awful. The whole planet kind of agrees on this. And it went a route to make everyone morally ambiguous. I mean, you had a Superman who kills, you've got a Batman who maims people and leaves them, branded with a bat symbol in a very visible place, a la the frickin' bloody bastards from the Quentin Tarantino film where they carve the swastika in everybody's head that they let survive. But I think there's an interesting aspect to the more classic Batman versus Superman storyline, in that Superman has always been the Boy Scout, that true blue, red-blooded American heroic ideal that we hold up, that everybody's out for truth, justice, and the American way. And Batman is more grounded. It's a more realistic look at someone who is putting on tights and fighting people for committing crimes. And then you look at, the cultural ambiguousness of crime. Like, are you stealing that loaf of bread because you need to feed your family? Or are you stealing the TV because you get a kick out of breaking into people's houses and taking their stuff?
Right.
And I think that when you place that on the shoulders of Batman, you create this much deeper, richer anti-hero type character. Whereas with Superman, he's always stopping, cataclysmic stuff. Like, he rescues people by catching an airplane that's falling out of the sky. Right. He's not stopping direct villains doing directly diabolical things unless it's really big. He's not stopping your average mugger on the street and then finding out that the mugger was mugging people because he had to feed his kids or pay his child support.
Well, I think also too, a lot of the appeal, or I think it's when people say, "Oh, let's run an evil campaign," I think a lot of times they're talking about running something that's grim or gritty and dark.
Yeah,
not necessarily evil, quote unquote.
I think you get some of that. I think you also just get players who want to live in a consequence-free world.
Right.
The players who want to play evil because it sounds really cool to kill anyone you want, take anything you want, and not have consequences for your actions, they're not thinking about the fact that playing evil means dodging consequences through the entire game.
Right. So, I mean, we've made the pop culture reference before. Let's make another one. Game of Thrones, evil campaign.
I mean, pretty much we talked about this in the green room. There's a lot of like intrigue to it, but pretty much everybody just wants to rule. Like Ned Stark is the only one that really wanted to like restore order and maintain it. And he, spoiler warning, didn't make it past season 1.
Well, I think you could argue that there's a couple of other characters in the show who show very altruistic tendencies. Mm-hmm. With that said, I think this goes back to that definition I offered at the very start of the show. Once half your characters are willing to commit morally ambiguous and morally reprehensible acts for selfish desires, you're running an evil campaign. So I think that absolutely tips that scale, and George R.R. Martin and his Dance of Dragons falls well into the pool of evil campaigns.
Well, let's talk about an evil system, a system built on the premise of White Wolf's Vampire, the Masquerade, the original vampire series. You're supposed to be playing the monsters.
Yes, and
I haven't seen that played out in any actual play I've seen. I think it's this very high stylized ideal, like, oh, we should be playing the Victorian fascination with death, and but we're a subculture, we're monsters, we're the hated and hunted, we have to do horrible things to survive, and we're tortured about it. Never seen that game played at a table using Vampire the Masquerade.
Let's be blunt. The Vampire the Masquerade is really played by kind of two major subsets of players. The LARPers who want to wear fangs, drink Clamato juice, and take up an entire wing at the local convention in their sexy Victorian costumes, leaving hickeys on each other's necks because it sounds, goth and edgy to do that when all the rest of the gamers are sitting at tables dice. And then the other subset are the people who really want to play superheroes, and they're hand-waving away that their superpowers are vampiric powers that are powered by blood. Mm-hmm. Neither subset is looking at that monster within that you're supposed to be role-playing, fighting against that push-pull relationship with having to drain your victims of blood to survive. And yes, I can use alacrity or these other powers, but every time I do, I'm draining that blood pool, which means I'm going to have to eat somebody later. Mm-hmm. And, it's this ideal of how that's supposed to be played that's written into the structure of the rules of the game, gets hand-waved, ignored, and house-ruled away because it's not fun for the players. And I'm not saying that's good, bad, or otherwise, but because of that, no one's played it.
Yeah. Sunset Sam says it's a Jekyll and Hyde struggle, which brings up a very good point, sort of playing off that, Dave. Nature versus nurture. Do we have to rely on a mechanic to sort of play into that animalistic desire, or are the players going to have their own desire?
I think that rises out of role play and your player characters, to be specific.
I think it depends on your players.
Right.
Jim has said on numerous occasions that we all play with shitty players because he sees this group of players that he plays with as being this elevated step above, because he doesn't have the horror stories that everybody keeps telling him from their tables arise at his table. He's got people who are there for the same motivation he plays the game for. Whereas at the other end of the spectrum, I would say Jamie Pearson's another one who, when he sits down to the table, gets the exact same set of players he desires to play with and who are looking for the same type of game he's looking for. Jamie's not sitting down with players and then lamenting the way they interact with the game he runs for them, and neither is Jib. And I don't think either one's actually got better players. It's just being selective and then using the mechanics that fit your player characters. You know, Jamie talks all the time about how there's aspects of Savage Worlds that he wishes was more like D&D, and he keeps going back to D&D for certain specific games, or into other systems. Even when he goes to play Star Wars, he plays the Fantasy Flight games, because those mechanics with his players fit that game better for him. Jim talks about playing a lot of different systems with his core group as well, but I think that it belies the issue of, if you've got one set of players, you need an alignment mechanic that tells them how their player character should act within this target hallway, and then anything outside of it, they're starting to diverge from that main path they've chosen, and maybe that's the story. But at the other end of the spectrum, you've got the players who genuinely just want to play deep, calculating characters that are alien to their own way of thinking, alien to their own way of life, but that they want to explore and have take real human actions and emotionally driven acts. And that subset of players doesn't need an alignment mechanic or a motivation mechanic that awards them a Benny every time they do something that's within their motivation, because they're going to do it anyway. That's their style of role play.
Yeah, I would say that the mechanic, any kind of mechanic about morality, humanity, motivation, any kind of mechanic there is there to help the player who isn't well-versed, I won't say well-versed, enthusiastically pursuing a role-play experience, to kind of coalesce the group a little bit for those who are. It's kind of a high tide raises all ships kind of idea. That I've got three players over here are deep in role play
standard that everyone has to meet, whether you've got players that are going to do it naturally versus players who actually need that direction.
Right. So let's address the elephant in the room. If we're gonna run an evil campaign, we've kind of had the debate about what is evil, what is not evil. Let's talk about brass tacks and bringing it down to reality and running an actual game. How do you do it if you're wanting to run an actual evil campaign? I would say that the first thing you have to realize as a GM is it's probably going to be very short-lived.
Right. Because
the nature of the evil campaign eventually devolves into PvP Armageddon.
Yep.
As it should. If you're playing truly evil characters, at some point they should be backstabbing each other, maybe flat out killing each other, poisoning each other, getting rid, tying up quote unquote loose threads.
I just want to point out again, Jared is talking about player characters, not players themselves.
I said player characters, didn't
I? I heard players at least once in
okay.
there by itself. I do just want to make sure that we don't stray across that line.
Yeah. I'm not advocating homicide.
Terrorism in your day-to-day life.
I'm not advocating homicide by any stretch of the imagination, but hey, if that's how you decide to play, I have to give you kudos for staying in character. Damn.
I mean, consequences for those actions.
Holy shit.
This is why I don't LARP. I gotta say, I'd say that the first step is picking a genre and asking who are the villains of that genre. Think about it. Richard Wilcock does the Goblin Horde, really tongue-in-cheek, but goblins are bad guys in the fantasy setting. And he's made a really fun game out of the fact that you're taking these characters that you wouldn't be able to play normally, and you're very tongue-in-cheek, sort of throwing your allies in front of gallant heroes.
There's a web series comic called Goblins by Terrell Hunt. It's great. Unfortunately, he has some mental issues. He deals with a lot of stress and things like that. And because of his mental illness, he's not as active, and it doesn't come out regularly. But it's a great idea in that it started when I think 3.5 came out, and you had the whole, you could take any character from the monster manual and play it as a playable race. And he took that and ran with it and made the entire cast of main characters these goblins, and they're hunted by a set of player characters through most of the comic. And it is an amazing story. It's a great way of looking at it. And you see the goblins as the heroes of the story. And I think therein lies the difference. We're not at least I'm not talking about a game where the players play quote unquote evil characters. You know, drow elves or goblins, or or in the Mafia game that we're doing on Friday nights, to me, doesn't need to be an evil game. It could be a group of guys who are in the Mafia doing what they have to do to survive without it being an evil campaign, because despite the fact the player characters, the protagonists of the story, are mafiosos, the bad guys can still be corrupt cops and the rest of the system that they're taking advantage of.
Right.
So I think there's a difference between an evil game and a game in which you play the bad guys. And I think that this tonal difference is what, it's just like Jim used to say, horror is not a genre. Horror is the special salt you put on top of a genre to have it come out a certain flavor. And I think evil's the same way. I think you can play any of the settings that are available for Savage Worlds or create your own and choose to play good or evil, regardless of which side of the line within that setting the player characters reside on. You can play an evil campaign where the player characters are corrupt cops.
Right.
Right.
Streets of Bedlam. That appears to be a lot of corrupt cops in that game. Drakenheim, City of Bones, your necromancers if you want to be. And they're traditionally villains, but I mean, they did save the city by raising the dead. Necessary Evil. You are literally a villain, like literally a super villain during the time of gameplay, but you're like, you know what?
I was waiting to see if we got through the whole show without pointing to the 800-pound gorilla in the pinnacle room. That is Necessary Evil, where by definition you play villains.
I love how that 400-pound gorilla is also a cyborg with Hitler's brain in it, because that is Necessary Evil in a nutshell. We must save the world!
That Savage Spit Take is brought to you by Dustin Smith of Savage World GM Podcast. Well done.
Well, and I'm going to bring this up. Sunset Sam, one of our patrons, brings up a good point in the live chat, in stating, but other than conventions, and I think he's talking about, the conventions of gaming, what we're talking about as far as an evil game, don't you sort of naturally select or groom the same style of players you like? Well, yeah, of course.
Different ways. I mean, you got the GM who just walks into the local game store, throws the books down in the middle of the table, and whoever walks in the door is free to join the game. And then you have the guys who, like Jamie Pearson's talked about the fact that the core group of people he played games with is the same group of people he's played games with for over 15 years. I mean, yeah, you've absolutely trimmed that hedge to get exactly the players you want in that situation. But there's other GMs out there who just throw the doors open and let anybody walk through and join the game. And in those situations, it's a lot more difficult to know that week in and week out, you're going to have the same type, much less caliber of player.
Right. Well, at a certain point, though, if you have a preference, you're gonna tend to gravitate towards like-minded players who can handle the. And well, this is a good point to bring. Let's go ahead and bring this up. As much as I hate to say it, session 0, adult conversation, mark it off on your bingo card. You need to sit down with your players and say, listen, if we're going to play an evil game, we need to roughly define the tone not get mired down in the definition of evil. Do you need to create a two-dimensional, greedy, backstabbing, maniacal villain? No. You want to play that? Could it be fun? Sure. Go ahead. You have to kind of establish, hey, what are the limits of PvP? Do we allow the players in the group, or is everybody comfortable with stealing from each other, setting each other up, backstabbing, framing your the guy sitting to your left in the game world, so the cops come and arrest him and get rid of him? I mean, you need to kind of have that conversation of where are we going to go with this? You can totally have a PvP open style game. Now, I'm going to say this. PvP, in my experience, you really need to be an advanced GM to sort of let that happen openly in your game, because it's always going to devolve into it. More times than not, it's going to devolve into one player being an asshole about it and just out of character, even for the game you're playing, started going around picking fights just so he can roll dice in combat against another player character and troll your game. So you kind of have to put limits on it. Everybody has to be comfortable with it as part of play, and say, hey, listen, we can have PvP, we can have inter-party conflict, as long as the resolution is non-lethal. That could be one of the things you can say. As long as the resolution is a non-lethal resolution, then fine, go ahead and knock yourself out. But you're going to have that conversation. You're going to have to set, I don't want to say limits, but expectations. You have to clearly define what those expectations are for the game.
I think that's one of the issues that comes up. You get a certain sect that wants to be able to do anything. Like they have this idea that you can do anything you want in a game, and therefore they test the boundaries, they push the limits, and they're like, well, why can't I kill this other player? I'm like, because, well, I guess.
That would be a dick move.
Yeah. I mean, like,
well,
I mean, like you have.
Or is it motivated by story? Is there a background to this? Has he had it coming?
So I'm going to throw out what Draco X said in chat before I weigh in, because it ties very closely to something I want to touch on with this particular conversation. And he said, evil characters should not get too far because they would be their own worst enemies. The less party members means the less you have to divide the rewards, and evil characters are generally greedy. I disagree with the wording he's chosen. I don't think evil characters are generally greedy. I think they're self-interested. That doesn't mean they're greedy. With that said, if evil characters are their own worst enemies, we don't need player characters in good games, because the GM sooner or later just role plays the villain to self-destruct. This idea that evil will destroy itself, it's campy, it's cute to say, but real evil, real corruption, real power has a way of surviving and being cruel to everyone around it to protect itself. And yes, we can say it's its own worst enemy, but there's always new henchmen to hire. There's always another guy who you can convince to come work for you as your stormtroopers. With that said, I think the boundary of the PvP within your game has to be set early on, because otherwise, the first time everyone goes to sleep and the player character at your table who is truly dastardly is going to slit the throat of everyone's sleeping character, which is an automatic kill through coup de grace, take their stuff, and you've got 4 or 5 players now rolling up new characters because one player decided, I want everyone's stuff. That's the type of evil that Draco is talking about. That, while absolutely is going to be great for a one-shot, it falls completely apart when you start talking about, a high concept evil, the morally ambiguous, I'm going to do whatever it takes to protect my family. That's a almost altruistic goal, but the Machiavellian route to it and the dastardly, morally reprehensible things you're willing to do to protect your family suddenly make that an evil, interesting player character for a player to absolutely run with in your game.
Well, I would say this too. So we were kind of talking about this in the green room. I think it bears repeating here in the broadcast. In order for you to have any real kind of success with this, you need to not build trope, cliched, evil characters, so to speak, but characters should have they should have selfish motivations that require other players to make happen and come true. So if we're talking about, for example, we brought up Breaking Bad earlier in the podcast. I would say that the character of Jesse, his motivation is selfish, just greed. I want to be rich. I don't want to have to work. I want to just have money. Well, Mr. White's a way to get that because he doesn't have the chemistry knowledge and everything to kind of make that product as good as it is, but he's got the contacts. They have to, their own selfish agendas feed each other and support each other. And I think that when you're building and having that session 0, that's a kind of a good thing to sit there and talk about with the players. Let's create characters that, at least in the beginning, have to rely on each other in order to achieve their evil, self-interested motivations and goals. And then you get up to a certain point where naturally, all right, well, I've achieved my goal, so I no longer need you.
Well, and okay, so huge spoiler alert for anyone who's not watched the entirety of Sons of Anarchy. For me, that show is, as a GM, if you want to know how to run a truly good evil campaign, go watch all 7 seasons. There is a character dynamic between the main character and the main character's father in this show through the entirety of the show, where the audience is let in on the subplot that the father killed the biological father of the main character.
It's Hamlet.
Cold-blooded murder killed him. That plot runs literally the length of the entire series. That is a subplot that drives so many betrayals and backstabs and these evil beatings and acts of horrific violence that just is kept at a simmer through the entire series. And then it's only brought to a boil in the final season when everything, all the loose ends are being finally tied up. That is how you run that self-interested player character motivations that cross paths. You let them simmer for quite some time, and then when your players reach a point where one or the other of them maybe is ready for the betrayal to happen, one or the other of them maybe is they've told the story with that character, they're ready to move on. It's time to let that betrayal come out, boil over at the table, end in a violent struggle or a nice, maybe you just tie a bow on it through narration and introduce a new character. And maybe you can even have a moment where one player character fully betrays the other, and by the end of, maybe a 2 or 3 session arc, they're working together again. Because betrayal is expected. We're the bad guys, aren't we? We do bad things. Can be just that excuse that can be thrown between them of fucking course I stabbed you in the back. It meant more for me.
Right. Why are you getting all upset? Why are you getting all twisted up about it? God, let it go. This is what we do. You're surprised that somebody lied to you in our evil group? Get over it. Yeah, I think also too that depends on what kind of game you're going to have. I want to say almost more cerebral gameplay overall if you're going to run an evil campaign. There need to be political machinations. There need to be plots and things going on that the characters are trying to achieve. Every session could not be them just slaughtering a village or nuking a town or killing everybody in sight. Now you can't have the fun thing for the GM is to have the ingenue heroes step in. Listen, you're evil. I'm here to stop you, and just get crushed.
Well, you can do like the Monster of the Week storyline for your evil campaign, where every week it's a new hero that shows up to stop them. But sooner or later, that's just not as fulfilling because they're not getting to pursue those evil plot lines. Now,
Right.
One thing I will say, and again, this refers back to the session 0, the motivation. Real good bad guys have a goal. They have something they're trying to accomplish and work toward. Mm-hmm. If your players don't enter the game with a goal their character is trying to achieve, then they're never going to be a self-starter within your game. As a GM, you're going to have to constantly throw out an evil plot hook for them to gobble up. If you want the player characters to burn with the fire that a villain has in his belly, you have to start them at session 0 with a goal that their character is hell-bent on achieving. I get to kill the bat. Dustin gets to make $1 billion. And Jared gets to install frickin' lasers on frickin' sharks.
Yeah. And they shall be complementary goals too, like we were saying before. They should complement each other. I think
I was going to say that I feel like the GM really needs to ask the player, what is your overarching goal? Like, because if you watch a lot of fiction, the hero tends to be in reaction, not proactive. They tend to be reactive to what the villains have done. So it's going to require the players are going to come up with their own decision. They can't be in a reactive state of this is what's happening.
Right.
And that kind of like, I'd like to bring it up. If you think about it, if you ever play a cyberpunk game, are you playing a villain?
Absolutely. Why? Well, no, once again, there's the rebel clause.
The rebel clause, yep.
Corporations are evil and deserve it.
Right, because they are full of stormtroopers and contractors.
That's right. Well, and it's like we said too, it's the Walter White thing. It really, I mean, there's no more altruistic goal than I've been diagnosed with terminal lung cancer. I have 6 months to live. I'm not leaving anything behind for my family. I need to make a shit ton of money as fast as I possibly can.
So,
but it's misguided. It's ultimately a misguided goal, right? Because instead of spending quality time in his last 6 months with his family, he's going, oh, money, 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 money.
So let me ask this. Are we willing to go a little off the rails and go long tonight, or is because it's Thanksgiving, everyone wants to be wham, bam, thank you, ma'am, done out?
I think we can go slightly a little bit longer.
Okay. So Dustin brings up an interesting thing that I want to tackle for a minute because it comes up constantly within the gaming sphere, and I think it deserves its own conversation separate from this. Cyberpunk is ridiculous, and it needs to stop being used as a example for anything, because in all reality, similar to a few other genres that are out there, cyberpunk was designed as propaganda to teach people that capitalism was the source of all evil and bad, and and was literally floated out there by poli-science majors, created the whole cyberpunk genre and wrote the first sets of cyberpunk fiction in a literary manner to lead you to a dystopian future where the right side of the political aisle has won the economic argument and taken complete control. Good, bad, otherwise regarding your politics, I don't care. It's still a propagandist piece, just like Orwell's 1984 is a propagandist piece in the other direction. That the think tank took over and created this dystopian authoritarian world. Both were rooted in the politics of the 60s, 70s, and 80s after seeing World War II, Korea, Vietnam, and the start of the long Cold War, left this world in a state where these two groups created these huge dystopian futures to scare the other side into stopping doing what they were doing. And we keep using them as a goddamn example of how to do a good game, and they're just, all rules go out the window when you commit that heavy to your theme that you throw out basic tenets like no government in the world is going to turn control of the world over to Apple. They're just not doing it. The government has an exclusive monopoly on force. It doesn't matter how much money Bill Gates and Steve Jobs have. They're going to get blown up because, well, the military is a thing that exists. And you can't just buy them guns to fight the military. Go try. Okay.
Listen, I totally disagree with your proletarian hate speech. Hashtag communist, hashtag sorry, not sorry. God damn it, Dave. No.
The party has been informed, and they will quickly delegate to someone who is not paid enough to do anything about it.
I would like to say that I am not, nor ever have been, a member of the Communist Party. The McCarthyism podcast. Awesome. No, wow. How do we go back on track to that?
We got dark as shit, man.
I would say this. Every piece of advice and every aspect of the discussion we've had about running an evil campaign is also excellent advice for running your regular campaign.
Right.
Oh, absolutely. I think therein lies the rub is if you're a good GM, you can run PvP. If you're a good GM, you can run evil motivations. If you're a good GM, you can get your players to be self-starters. If you're a good GM, you can put the appropriate limits in the session 0 that lead to the game, or prune the player bush, or all these things we've talked about. You can do it for any game. Mm-hmm. It doesn't have to be an evil game.
So I'm just wondering if there's something that we're overlooking. I feel like there's a piece of the conversation where we haven't addressed or leaving out.
Mel Primus actually brings up playing Paranoia.
I think he's talking about my discussion, but I mean,
oh wow,
Paranoia, another great game that is born completely out of that Cold War, post World War II, and the military buildup of the world era that really led to a game that is phenomenally fun, but yet again, it's anchored in this idea that your players have to be against each other.
Yeah.
You know, that everyone's the enemy.
Yeah, it's also a good model. It's a good model for how to run a PvP in a fun and interesting way, where you're setting each other up to be, treasonous against the master computer, intentionally pointing fingers at each other so they get zapped and you burn through your clones.
I'm gonna just throw this out there since we got on the subject of it. Has anyone ever read Atlas Shrugged?
Or seen the horrible Hackney version of the movie that they did?
Which was like Diesel Cyberpunk? Yes. So
Punk, I loved it.
So here's the deal, right? For those of you who aren't familiar with the plot, even though everybody claims John Galt is the main character, I feel Dagny Taggart is the main character, and she is trying to build a transcontinental railroad. But for whatever reason, like, the economic structure just keeps breaking down, and she's doing everything to hold her company together. She starts uncovering, like, a plot, a mystery. Well, all of this is going on, like, a great deal of social programs are being introduced in the society, and people are losing their motivation to produce for themselves or to work hard. because they don't have to survive. They can the income is being absorbed from the people that are productive and given to the people who are not productive, and because of that, society is becoming very unproductive. So Dagny is trying to build this company not for her own financial gain, but for the concept of legacy. And she starts uncovering that there are a lot of other well-motivated business entrepreneurs that are just opting out of society. She eventually tracks down the culprit, which is a man named John Galt, who has this philosophy that they have to destroy the economy by taking the people who produce things of value and sequestering them in their own like summer camp.
And to be fair, it's the equivalent propaganda piece that we see in Cyberpunk, told in the anti-communist, anti-socialist mentality that Ayn Rand had, and it led to the whole. There's an actual political party out there based on this idea of you have to be self-motivated and you have to have your own personal self-interest at heart. And I think similar to Cyberpunk, unfortunately, it means, well, it's a great, interesting story. It's horrible for gaming because, again, you have to throw so many rules out to commit to the theme.
Mm-hmm.
Though it would make an amazing Deadlands noir type story to run. Right. For those who haven't seen it and are open to playing something that's very right wing in the ideas that it puts forward, whereas Cyberpunk's far more left wing. The Ayn Rand stuff is far more right wing. The interesting aspect, though, when we look at so much of what's available in true evil oftentimes gets portrayed based on the culture that you're from. And I think that's an aspect that we haven't really touched on much. Because think back to the start of World War II when the American Marines were showing up and you had beheaded Japanese men with their bellies slit open and no one knew what was going on. They thought the Japanese generals were committing war crimes against their own high-ranking officers and leaving the bodies there as a sign of their failure, when in reality that was part of their culture and wasn't an evil act at all. But the American culture saw that as evil when these men committed seppuku, and then they couldn't even wrap their heads around the kamikaze tactics, because again, the evil empire is entirely a cultural perspective on actions of men who were doing what was the honorable thing in their society.
Right.
Well, I think if you wanted to run that type of game, probably the easiest trapping genre to throw on that would be an alien encounter, right? A sci-fi alien encounter, where you're dealing with a completely alien culture. I think an interesting evil game, quote unquote, would be the Dastardly League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. Be like take all the great literary heroes from the Victorian era, not heroes, sorry, villains from the Victorian era, Dr. Moriarty, blah, blah, blah. You just throw in all the most evil literary characters you could think of, and damn it, they're done. They're done. Alan Quartermain must die. That's your first session.
The League of Exceptional Scoundrels.
Well, I mean, the acronym is amazing, but League of Super Evil.
Yeah.
Took Dustin a minute to catch up. It's been a rough Thanksgiving for him, folks.
Oh man,
another one though. You know, if we're gonna talk about pulp culture references and things like that can really kind of push over the edge is, and I almost hate to say this, go watch Dr. Horrible's sing-along blog, where every single evil character has this defined thing they're trying to achieve, except you find out they're all just idiots. Dr. Horrible has a PhD in horribleness, and he wants to make the world better by cutting off the head of the fish because it rots from the head. And I mean, it's just the hero of the story, Captain Hammer, is completely self-absorbed. He's that comic book hero, but with the mentality of the villain. It's a great little campy piece, but when you watch it all the way through and you dig into what Joss Whedon and that group of very creative people put together, each one of those, Dr. Horrible has a world goal he's trying to reach. Bad Horse has a world goal he's trying to reach. And they look down on the other villains in the world who are just dogs chasing cars, who just are, running willy-nilly after anything that shows up that might make them profit or do something, rather than having a consistent world goal they're trying to achieve. And that is a model for what to pitch to your players when you want to run that Snidely Whiplash, high trope, curly mustache version of pulp evil, is you run a Dr. Horrible sing-along blog type game.
Right, along the same vein too, you could just do all the defeated Bond villains getting together and going after James Bond.
Yeah,
as a comedy, as a high comedy concept.
You have amazing hindrances where the player characters have to, give soliloquies right before they die, or they have what was the one
elaborate, easily escapable traps left and leave the room.
And you put those in as these amazing hindrances for your player characters, and every time they buy the trope, they get the better.
Right, and they do the thing where their goal is to destabilize the world economy by blowing up Fort Knox, or stealing all the gold in Fort Knox, or some outrageous thing that's gonna never work. It's just very high concept, never gonna work. Oh, we've stolen the nuclear codes. Launch codes to all the bombs, Mr. Bond. Yeah, but they change those frequently, like every 3 days. Shut up! like that kind of, you can play it for high comedy as well. So
it's like once you've stolen the codes, don't they just, I don't know, change them?
Change them? Yeah.
Heaven forbid. I mean, we have so many movies out there about the superhero has to go and get the codes back. Does no one know the IT guy who can just make a phone call and change it from 11111 to 22222?
Right, the villain, the master disarm code for the bomb, the Doomsday Machine, is 12345.
Right.
Well, tangentially, just an interesting side note, it has been revealed through some government documentation that due to a restriction put forward by the United States Air Force back when the nuclear football was first invented as a thing, that the president had access to the nuclear launch codes. The nuclear launch code was basically a string of ones for quite some time, because it had to be a simple enough code that everyone could remember it.
What's the hex? What's the hex value for boom?
I love how World War III is prevented through math. You know what? They just need a Capica. You cannot launch the bombs if you are a robot.
Right. Click here, prove you're not a robot to launch devastation. Yeah. All right. Well, I think we've sufficiently handled this topic of running evil games and evil campaigns. Let's just check
the dead horse.
Yeah, let's check the chat one more time to make sure there's nothing in the live chat.
Sunset Sam mentions monologues, which is, again, if you're going to run an evil game, especially the high trope pulp evil game, you have to have that in there as a hindrance. Then they can't act on a club in combat because their character stops and gives a monologue for why the good guys can never eat. Good is bad because it's weak, and you cannot survive because evil is stronger.
Or the Spaceballs quote: "Good, evil will always triumph because good is stupid."
Stupid.
I gotta admit, guys, like there have been a lot of works of fiction out there where the heroes were complete morons.
Yep.
Well, I mean, there's a set of books out there like the Hero's Guide to Being a Hero, where it's literally a guy with a guidebook he's reading from on how to defeat the evil power, and they cut to the bad guy who's arguing with the secretary like, I know we are not allowed to do that, but that's why we lose. Let's do it this one time.
Just shoot him in the head. Come on.
I've got a gun. Shh. But you just don't get it, do you? You just don't get it. You don't get it. Yeah. Anything from the Austin Powers universe, just do a Dr. Evil bit would be a great. I think it's interesting that our final piece of advice is run an evil campaign is high comedy. And with that,
I think at the end of the day, though, we kind of started on the vein of it works better as a one shot. It works better as a short thing. Don't try, it can have some legs, but it's a lot of work. So don't do that shit and just make it comedy and go with it.
Yeah, have some fun with it. All right. Well, until next time, first of all, happy Thanksgiving. And this is Jared Savage Daddy Gunning for Dave and Dustin saying keep rolling, stay savage.